Rampton, the secret hospital, is isolated and inward-looking. Many of the staff live on the hospital estate, where father passes his job on to son. There have been official attempts to open up Rampton, notably the confidential Elliot report for the Department of Health. He called Rampton a profoundly unhappy place where motives are suspected and grudges born. True, Elliot says, I saw examples of dedicated, thoughtful and compassionate involvement by nurses working with the most difficult patients. But overall, he concluded, a fair proportion, judging from demeanour and attitude, were security officers and liked it that way. Nursing at Rampton presents a dark picture. Elliot's report was sparked off by this 1972 dispute. Rampton nurses belonged to the Prison Officers Association, not to a nursing union. They worked a 14-hour shift every second day, which the authorities tried to abolish.
We got to know the patients. We worked with continuity on the wards. We knew which ward we'd be on. We knew which team we'd be working with. The patients got to know the team. They knew who they could trust. They knew who they could talk to. It takes time to establish relationships with these type of people.
But the Elliot report noted another less altruistic reason why the nurses cling to the 14-hour day. Simply, it allows many of the nurses to hold down a second job or run their own businesses. There is never a shortage of staff at Rampton. In fact, the nurses are very highly paid. With overtime, a charge nurse can earn over £8,000 a year, and some nurses take unofficial perks, many on visiting day. We received 38 allegations of property, particularly gifts of food, sweets and cigarettes brought by parents, being stolen by staff, often from the subnormal.
By the time the patient had been had dressed, called into the office again, his goodies were already distributed amongst the senior nursing staff. They had taken the pick of what they wanted. And that bag would contain apples, oranges, some cigarettes, pears, sweets of various kinds, chocolates, things like that. And the staff would have the first pick of it.
Elliot ended his report with this plea. Rampton is in dire need of radical change, both in attitudes and in practice. Since this dispute, almost nothing has been changed. Indeed, last year, a confidential study by psychiatrist Dr. Ian Drummond concluded, in some cases, positive harm comes to patients. Unfortunately, none of these inquiries spoke much to patients. But our investigation shows that it is often the 400 handicapped and helpless who are victims of the most unsavoury assaults.
There was a subnormal patient. He'd been there for many, many years, and severely subnormal. One of the characteristics about this chap was that he had a large penis, which was sort of a joke throughout the hospital. And periodically he would be encouraged by staff to expose himself and to lay his penis on a table, and the staff who carry keys on leather straps would attempt to hit it. On some occasions they did, and obviously the patient was in some pain over this.
I've seen a jug of water being poured over an old man's head when the staff crept up behind him. A jug of cold water down over his head and absolutely drenched. This was just to liven things up, to get the old man going, to have a bit of a laugh.
The young lad had sort of given up on me sort of going and get it, and was getting obviously more and more frustrated and cross about the situation, went down and asked the charge nurse for the paper, and he was kicked up and down the corridor and his clothes ripped off him. 2 other staff came onto the ward who were nothing to do with the ward. They were merely escorting patients and coming to pick up patients to go off to some function or to work or wherever. Just joined in. And they didn't know why or what was happening, but they just carried on kicking this patient up and down the ward, and by this time he was stark naked. His watch was ripped off and thrown down the corridor. I was frightened myself by the sheer violence that was being shown to this patient. I was frightened stiff. I just stood there and didn't know what to do.
I've seen the nurse screwing his testicles up, actually sitting him on the side of a bed. It was one of those long steel frame beds and putting his testicles out over it and standing on them. I protested, and I was told, well, the poor bugger don't feel nothing anyway.
A subnormal patient who doesn't really know what he's doing, or whether he's doing right or wrong, or what time of the day it is. I remember him being dragged along a long corridor from the day room towards the charge nurse's office by the charge nurse and staff nurse. On reaching the office, his trousers were taken down, his legs were spread apart, and whilst the staff nurse held him, the charge nurse was pulling the pubic hair out of the scrotal sac with a pair of pliers.
Often, day-to-day care of the subnormals, or low grades, is entrusted to other patients.
There were sweet kids. I know there was maybe about 30 sometimes, over 30 years old. And I know I'm a lot younger than them. You know, they used to act like children, you know. And yet, I always thought there was... But my kids, you know, I used to love them just as much as anything. There was Mary. She'll always stick out in my mind because she was so delicate, you know. And she used to touch the wall, yell, twist round, and go to another part of the room, touch it, twist round, and yell. She's always done that ever since I was on that ward. And Mary started, you know, touching the wall, twisting round and yelling. And of course, Mrs. couldn't take it. She took Mary down to a side room and she started hitting her with a crumb brush. And before I got to the door, it was already locked and I couldn't get through it. And I could hear Mary screaming, you know. And if I'd got through that door, I honestly and truly would. I would have took that brush off her and I would have given her what she was giving her. Because she is a low grade. And low grades do have feelings, even though they can't help what they do.
Brian, you used to look after one subnormal patient, didn't you?
Yeah, he used to throw his excrement up at the ceiling. And staff used to think it's funny would be to mix it with his breakfast. And, you know, get him to eat it. And him being, you know, really subnormal, he knew no difference. And he used to eat it.
At times, he really used to play up. And fair enough, he needed a clout around the lug. And he did ask for it. But some of the beatings I've seen him take, and I mean beatings, kickings, I've seen him dragged up a corridor by his hair, just dragged and being booted by two other screws because he sat in the corner and wet himself. Because they wouldn't open the toilet for him to go. He's got to learn how to do it himself, he's got to learn how to control it. But he just isn't intelligent enough. And so they'll just drag him up the corridor, bang him in a room where he'll wet the bed so he gets another kicking for wetting the bed. There's not very often he didn't have a bruise. And I was on that ward for nearly a year. They'd kick him saying, shut up, shut up, shut up, you're an idiot, you know, and they'd just beat him up. That is the only way. They just kick hell out of you.
Was it often involving mentally handicapped patients?
Very often. Because they couldn't... There's no worry for them. They can't go and tell their mother that they've been beaten up.
They used to give him a big hard-on because he had a big penis. And they used to get him to lay it onto the billiard table itself. And when he did, they used to whack it with a billiard cube.
But this tiny handicapped child, sent to Rampton while still in short trousers, and pictured here on the admission ward, did tell his parents of many beatings, including bruised testicles. Steve Wilkins remembers what happened soon after this picture was taken.
He says, what's the matter? I said, oh, he's okay, you know, he's just a bit frisky, like. And he says, keep him there a minute. Anyway, he came back and he had this bottle, and it was proaldehyde, a liquid drug. It more or less makes you dopey, you know. It can put you asleep if you have enough of it. And he just poured this stuff into his mouth, you know, no measuring cup, medicine cup or all like that, just straight out the bottle, straight down his mouth, nearly choking him. And I didn't say anything, you know, I was too scared myself. Anyway, after he poured it into his mouth, he held his head back and he opened his eyes and he poured this stuff into his eyes as well.
Into his eyes?
Into his eyes, yeah. Anyway, I went to the bath to fill it up with water. He said, cold water. So I filled it up with cold water right to the top, like. And he just got hold of this kid. And he's about 6'2", this charge nurse. And he just got hold of him, picked him up at arm's length and just slammed him straight down into the bath.
The number of similar allegations concerning the mentally handicapped, 212. Many of what the nurses call the black aspirin, kicking with the boot, the last one a few days ago. Then there is the case of teenager Linda Bacon. Schizophrenic and potentially suicidal, she was transferred from a psychiatric hospital to Rampton. One visiting day, Linda's cropped hair smelt unpleasant. Another patient urged Linda to tell her mother why.
Tell her that you vomited your dinner back and they've used you as a mop. Mopped the floor up with her head. And when I were visiting her, they'd wiped it and tried to clean it with a sponge. But of course the smell was still there. It smelt vile. Mrs. Green had to leave the visiting room to be sick.
It was terrible. It was awful. It smelled horrible. I said, poor, what have they done to you and my dog? And she said, that's what they've done, Mrs. Green, to me.
So they'd actually mopped up her own vomit when she was ill with her hair?
After that visit, when we complained about her hair, she was taken down into a cell, hit with wet towels and scrubbed with a yard brush. And I said, what they do that for? She said, to learn me to keep my mouth shut.
One day, the police came to tell Mrs. Bacon that Linda had been found dead at Rampton. After waiting hours, she was finally permitted to see a duty doctor.
And I asked him what was the cause of Linda's death. So he said, well, she's just sat on the floor, Mrs. Bacon, and strangled herself. I said, you what? So he said, she sat on the floor. We found her cross-legged on the floor, strangled.
Some patients come into Rampton by pure chance, sometimes through an unpredictable accident. Take Maxwell Turnbull. Coming from a service family, he had a happy childhood. At the local grammar school in Mansfield, he did particularly well. Then, aged 12, tragedy struck. He was knocked down by a car and suffered severe brain damage. In a local hospital, Maxwell began to have violent epileptic fits, and his mother was called in by the doctors.
They said that a security hospital, top security hospital, would be the best thing for him. He'd never injured anyone, never attacked anyone, but they, in their wisdom, said that Maxwell needed to go in a top security hospital. About a fortnight after, you can imagine what it was. We felt like getting it by letter. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Turnbull, we have decided to commit your son to Broadmoor.
When his father died, Maxwell was moved to Rampton to be nearer his mother, who works as the Conservative Party agent in Mansfield. In November 1978, he became angry in a therapy group.
They took him back, supposedly, to the ward. Up the back stairs this time, though. Top of the stairs, they hit Maxwell. Consequently, Maxwell, black eye, complained of ribs, pain in his ribs. And I saw the black eye and the cut beneath his left eye. I said, well, Maxwell, I'm not standing for this. No way. I said, this is the second time that you've said nurses have hit you. I said, I want the truth, Maxwell. Did this happen? Yes, Mum. I wouldn't be telling you, Mum. He said, I'm frightened. Really frightened. And I said, well, sorry, Maxwell. I said, I am going to put a formal complaint in. Mum, don't. He said, because I did say yesterday that you were going to report it. He said, and one of the staff said to him, the tempestuous patient will end in the tempest.
Maxwell's allegations were investigated. The nurses were cleared. The investigation, as is customary, was carried out by senior Rampton nurses themselves. Nurses we spoke to explained how evidence can sometimes be falsified.
On every ward there's an incident book, and wherever a patient is assaulted or got a mark or anything, it's got to be put in the incident book. But really, there's a way around that as well. Names has got to be put down. I have seen patients assaulted by staff, and I have seen mentally subnormal patients being picked out and accused of this unprovoked attack, and in actual fact that mentally subnormal patient's name would go down as having carried out the assault, which would cover up for the staff. I've seen that quite a few times.
Rampton seems to be a very, very much of a closed shop. We have people working at Rampton now who are in positions of authority, who've worked there for 20, 30 years. They're the old school. It seems to be a very, very large clique. And when one of their colleagues is in danger of being exposed as somebody who commits violence or provokes violence, as I said, they tend to close ranks, and there is a conspiracy of silence at times.
Additionally, the nurses see to it that other hospital staff are seldom left alone with patients.
The power of the nurses certainly made my job very difficult there. In as much as a lot of nursing staff, and certainly not all, but a lot, wouldn't allow me to see patients on my own. And that's one of the very basic skills or tools that a social worker should have at his disposal.
But inevitably, the climate of violence spreads beyond Rampton. At a nearby subnormality hospital, trainee nurses from Rampton, often teenagers, now come for 3 months training with mentally handicapped children. One nurse, June Alton, remembers bath night there for one 11-year-old handicapped girl with the Rampton trainees.
I could hear this girl crying, and it was Jackie, because I could tell her voice, you see. You know, you get used to all the voices. So that was funny, because she'd had a bath. So I just sort of went, put my head inside the door, and I couldn't believe what I'd seen, you know. They'd got us sat on the seat. Could have a seat in there to sit them in, obviously, because some of them were wobbly when you're drying them. And they got a wet tea towel, and they were sort of flicking her on the end of her feet. And she was screaming. Well, I just stood there and I said, what the devil do you think you're doing? She says, well, we bathed her and she'd made a mess in the bed again. I says, so what? I says, it just doesn't make sense. I says, that's torture, I says, what you're doing. I think I was that stunned, I just didn't know what to say. She cried for about an hour and a half after, and we went and took her back in the day room to watch the television, and she was still crying. I went to her 2 or 3 times, she was just holding her feet, and the feet was red. The feet was really red. And I thought, you know, what we're letting in here to train. If that's their tactics at Rampton, well, God help them at Rampton, that's all I can say.
At one end of the scale, violence against an 11-year-old handicapped girl. At the other, a brutal assault on this old man in his 70s. His name, Whitley Strawn. Whitley is a Rampton legend. In 1924, he stole a handbag in Oxford Circus. He was sent to Rampton instead of going to prison. Following that one offence, he spent 52 years in Rampton and other hospitals. This is what happened when he went to the Rampton Chapel one Christmas morning.
Went to the chapel, you see, and I knelt down to pray, you're supposed to do. And I must have leant against a woman, you see. And I got out and one of the staff said, come on, get moving, move away, come on. I started sort of getting away with my arms about a bit, and they got straight hold of me, dragged me out, 3 of them, and kicked me all the way up the corridor from my own accord and put me in the canvas in a room in the factory ward. That's all I did.
Where did they kick you?
All over here, all here. Privates and everything. All turned black and blue and turned brown, black and blue.
For 1.25 miles?
About a mile, a good distance, all up a stone corridor.
This wasn't to a man?
3 staff. Once you all this black and blue it was, all round here black and blue. Testicles and everything. Kicked me in the testicles and everything.
I was told by the charge nurse to go and look after this patient and sort of sit with him and make sure that he was okay, you know, comfortable. I got down there to find that it was this 70, I'm not sure of the age, I think it's about 70. This 70-year-old lying in bed in obvious pain. And I asked him what had happened, and he pulled down the bedclothes to show that from the waist down to just above his knees was absolutely black. I mean, there wasn't even a blue piece of skin. It was pitch black, and the whole of his groin was the same. It's quite disgusting. I immediately complained to the charge nurse and told him what I'd seen as it happened. And further than that, complained to the nursing officer. Nothing happened. Rampton tends to close ranks like that.
While making this programme, we tracked down 115 ex-patients all over Britain. Those who alleged brutality, every single one. We also spoke to ex-nurses, doctors, social workers, officials, and other members of the Rampton staff, 41 individuals. The total number of serious allegations, all these made, 801. The most recent assaults only a few days ago. In all, the number of individual nurses named to us and accused of brutality, 146.
There's that many words to choose from. It's hell. It is the most degrading thing any human being can go through, no matter what his intelligence. Be an IQ of nil or a genius, it doesn't matter. It is... I just can't explain it, really. It's just... There's nothing worse. It is the lowest place on this earth.
You know, you can put pretty curtains up on the wall and nice pictures and decor the place out. But, no, you can't change the system. You know, the system of brutality, you can't cover that up with nice things. No way. And it still goes on. It'll always go on, probably.
I can't sum it up. I just can't put it into words. I don't hate about it, because it's not an individual I can turn on. It's a system that has been allowed to go rotten.
It's, to my mind, an obscene institution, which neither cares nor treats for many of its inmates. Certainly if somebody who was close to me were going into Rampton, I rather hope I'd have the courage to give him a bottle of aspirins before then. And I really mean that.
The treatment that my son got was given to a dumb animal.
Secret hospital, we took a close look at Rampton Top Security Hospital. In part 2 tonight, we examine what for some patients is a light at the end of that dark tunnel. Behind me is Eastdale Villa, 30 miles south of Rampton, but quite separate. It's a halfway house where patients from Rampton and other top security hospitals can learn to cope with the normal world again. Years ago, many of them committed serious crimes.
I got sort of pissed up one night and had no money in my pocket, so I wanted some more money the next day for drink. And I broke into an house looking for money, and I was sort of caught and panicked and lashed out. And sort of took somebody's life.
You take a life. I can't put it into words except that I find it so difficult to go into a church anymore. I find it so... It's never completely away. I mean, if I thought for 1 minute that it could, or anything even similar like that again, I wouldn't want to be here, never alone outside. If I thought I weren't fit to live a normal, respectable life, that's it. I can't undo what I've done, but I can make damn sure that nothing even similar happens like it again.
Those two men have been in Rampton, the first for 11 years, the second for 18. Now they have a chance to return to society. With a handful of other Rampton patients, they find themselves, after years behind locked doors, enjoying their first taste of freedom. A day trip to Skegness from their halfway house at Eastgate.